The dust swirled around Emma Gardner as she stood at the edge of San Elizario, Texas, her weathered leather boots caked with the earth of 1,000 miles traveled. The year was 1875, and the weight of her past hung heavy on her thin shoulders as she stared at the distant ranch house that was to be her new beginning, or perhaps just another cruel end. Emma clutched the crumpled advertisement in her trembling hand. Ranch hand needed. Room, board, and fair wages offered. She'd responded out of desperation, having fled her previous position with nothing but the clothes on her back and the bruises that were just beginning to fade from her skin. The reply had come swiftly, offering her the job without question, an unusual stroke of luck that made her both hopeful and suspicious. The sun beat down mercilessly as she approached the modest but well-kept ranch house. The journey from Virginia had taken everything she had, but staying had not been an option, not after what Mr. Harrison had done what he had tried to do. Emma shuddered at the memory, unconsciously touching the fading mark on her cheek. As she neared the house, her heart pounded against her ribs. Experience had taught her that kindness from men often came with expectations, terrible ones. The last 3 positions she'd held had ended the same way, with her fleeing in the night, sometimes with even less than she'd arrived with. Emma paused at the gate, gathering what little courage remained in her 23-year-old heart. She had nowhere else to go, no money for another ticket, no family to return to. This had to work. Just long enough to save some money and perhaps move on to California, where she'd heard women could make decent wages in the growing cities. With a deep breath, she walked the final stretch to the door and knocked, her knuckles barely making a sound against the solid wood. She waited, preparing herself for whatever man might answer, old or young, drunk or sober, kind-faced but cruel-hearted like so many before. The door swung open, revealing a man in his late 20s with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the Texas sky. He wore no jacket, just a simple work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of ranch work. He was neither smiling nor frowning, simply observing her with a steady gaze that made Emma want to shrink back. But then he spoke, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Welcome home, partner." Emma blinked, certain she had misheard. Home, partner. These were not words she had expected, nor ones she had heard in many years, not since her parents had died of fever when she was 16, leaving her to fend for herself in a world that had shown her little kindness. "Mr. Abernathy?" she asked hesitantly, recalling the name from the correspondence. "Ethan Abernathy," he confirmed with a slight nod. "And you must be Miss Gardner. Please come in. You look like you could use some rest and a meal." Emma stepped cautiously over the threshold, her eyes darting around for signs of danger. The interior was simple but clean, with a wooden table, several chairs, a stone fireplace, and bookshelves that surprised her with their number of volumes. No empty whiskey bottles, no scattered playing cards, none of the usual signs she had come to associate with the men who eventually revealed their true natures. "Your room is through there," Ethan said, gesturing to a door off the main room. "It's not fancy, but it's yours for as long as you work here. Has its own lock, too." He reached into his pocket and produced a small brass key which he held out to her. Emma stared at the key in disbelief. "My own room, with a lock." "Of course," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Everyone deserves their privacy and safety." She took the key with trembling fingers, still uncertain. This kindness had to be a facade, a way to lower her guard. She had fallen for such tricks before. "I've got stew on the stove," Ethan continued, moving toward the kitchen area. "You're welcome to wash up first if you'd like. There's fresh water in the basin in your room." "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy," Emma said cautiously, still holding her small bag of possessions close to her chest. "Ethan, please," he corrected without looking back at her. "We work together now, Miss Gardner. No need for formalities." "Emma," she offered quietly, testing the waters of this unusual arrangement. She retreated to the promised room, half expecting to find it locked from the outside or already occupied. Instead, she discovered a clean, modest space with a narrow bed covered in a handmade quilt, a small dresser, a washstand with a ceramic basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the rolling Texas landscape. And true to his word, the door had a sturdy lock. Emma washed the travel dust from her face and hands, changed into her cleanest dress, which wasn't saying much after weeks on the road, and cautiously returned to the main room. Ethan had set the table with 2 bowls of steaming beef stew, fresh bread, and what looked like genuine coffee, not the chicory substitute she had grown accustomed to. "Sit, eat," he encouraged, taking his own seat. "You must be hungry after your journey." Emma sat gingerly on the edge of the chair, waiting for him to begin eating first, another lesson learned the hard way. When he did, she took a small spoonful of stew, the rich flavor nearly bringing tears to her eyes. It had been so long since she'd had a proper meal. "The work here isn't easy," Ethan said after they had eaten in silence for a few minutes. "But it's honest. I've got about 60 head of cattle, some chickens, 2 horses besides yours, assuming you brought one." Emma shook her head. "I came by stage and then walked the last few miles." Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Walked in this heat?" He shook his head. "Well, we'll have to find you a suitable mount. Can't have you walking everywhere on a ranch this size." "I can ride," Emma assured him quickly, not wanting him to regret his decision to hire her. "My father taught me as a girl." "Good. That'll make things easier." He took a drink of his coffee. "As I was saying, the work is hard but fair. You'll help with the cattle, the garden, repairs around the place. I pay weekly, and you get Sundays off unless there's an emergency." Emma nodded, waiting for the additional expectations, the unspoken conditions that always came later. But Ethan simply continued outlining the practical aspects of the job, the routine of the ranch, the nearest neighbors who were still a good ride away. "Any questions?" he asked finally. She had dozens, most centered around why he was being so decent, but she settled for, "Why did you hire me? Without meeting me first, I mean." Ethan set down his coffee cup, considering her question. "Your letter was honest, said you needed work and were willing to learn. Didn't make grand claims about skills you might not have. I value honesty." He paused. "And truth be told, I needed the help. This place is too much for one person." It seemed reasonable enough, but Emma remained cautious. She had learned that men's true intentions often revealed themselves only after time had passed and guards had been lowered. "Get some rest tonight," Ethan said, rising to clear the dishes. "We start early tomorrow." Emma insisted on helping with the washing up, despite his protests that she must be tired. She needed to establish her worth immediately, to show that she wasn't afraid of hard work. As they worked side by side at the wash basin, she stole glances at him, trying to read the character beneath the quiet exterior. Ethan Abernathy wasn't what she had expected. He wasn't old and lecherous like Mr. Peterson in Kentucky, nor young and volatile like Mr. Thompson in Missouri. He wasn't a drunk like Mr. Harrison, who had chased her through his house with whiskey on his breath and violence in his eyes. Ethan seemed steady, serious, and for now at least, respectful of the boundaries she desperately needed. That night, as Emma lay in the unfamiliar bed with the key turned firmly in the lock, she allowed herself the smallest flicker of hope. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps San Elizario would offer what nowhere else had: safety, fair work, and a chance to heal. But experience had taught her better. She would keep her guard up, her bag packed, and her eyes open. The real Ethan Abernathy would show himself eventually. They always did. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the soft glow of dawn through the calico curtains. Emma woke instantly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings before remembering where she was. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, a simple skirt and blouse that had seen better days, and twisted her chestnut hair into a practical bun. When she emerged from her room, she found Ethan already at the stove, frying bacon and eggs. The smell made her stomach growl embarrassingly loud. "Morning," he said without turning. "Coffee's ready if you want some." Emma poured herself a cup, savoring the rich aroma. Real coffee was a luxury she hadn't expected. "I thought we'd start by checking the south pasture fence today," Ethan said as they ate breakfast. "Storm last week might have damaged some sections." Emma nodded, finishing her food quickly. She was eager to prove her worth, to show that she wasn't afraid of hard work. Her previous employers had often complained that she wasn't strong enough for ranch work, using it as an excuse to relegate her to the house where their true intentions could more easily be carried out. After breakfast, Ethan led her to the barn where he introduced her to the horses. "This is Thunder," he said, patting the neck of a sturdy bay gelding, "and that's Penny." He nodded toward a smaller chestnut mare. "She's gentler, good for learning on if you're rusty." "She's beautiful," Emma said, approaching the mare slowly with her hand outstretched. The horse nickered softly, accepting Emma's touch without hesitation. "Looks like she likes you," Ethan observed with the hint of a smile. "She'll be yours to use while you're here." They saddled the horses, with Emma demonstrating that she did indeed know her way around tack, and rode out toward the south pasture. The morning air was still cool, but Emma knew the Texas heat would soon make itself felt. She had dressed accordingly, with a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the sun. As they rode, Ethan pointed out landmarks on the property: the creek that never fully dried up even in the worst droughts, the stand of cottonwoods where cattle often sought shade, the distant hills that marked the boundary of his land. "How long have you owned this ranch?" Emma asked, genuinely curious about this quiet man who defied her expectations at every turn. 5 years now," Ethan replied. "Bought it when it wasn't much more than a run-down shack and about 20 scraggly cattle. Previous owner lost his wife to fever and his will to live shortly after. Sold it to me for less than it was worth just to be rid of the memories." Emma nodded, understanding all too well how grief could hollow a person out. "And before that, worked other men's ranches since I was 15. Started as a hand, worked up to foreman by 20. Saved every penny I could." He glanced at her. "What about you? Your letter mentioned experience on ranches." Emma tensed. Her past wasn't something she liked discussing, particularly not the most recent chapters. "Similar to yours in some ways. My parents had a small farm in Virginia. After they passed, I worked where I could." She left out the uglier details, the progressively worse situations she'd found herself in as she moved west. Ethan seemed to sense her reluctance and didn't press further. Instead, he directed their attention to the fence line they'd come to inspect. Several posts had indeed been damaged by the storm, with wire sagging dangerously low. "We'll need to replace these posts," he said, dismounting. "The tools are in the saddlebags." Emma slid down from Penny's back, ready to assist. She'd done fence repairs before and knew the basics, though the men had usually taken on the heavier work of setting posts. To her surprise, Ethan didn't assume she couldn't handle the physical labor. He demonstrated how he wanted the work done, then assigned her a section of fence while he took another. They worked side by side under the intensifying sun, digging out damaged posts, setting new ones and restringing wire. By midday, sweat soaked Emma's blouse, and her muscles ached from the unfamiliar exertion. But she felt a sense of accomplishment looking at the repaired fence, sturdy now and ready to contain the cattle that would soon be moved to this pasture. "You work hard," Ethan commented as they took a brief break in the shade of a mesquite tree, sharing water from a canteen. It wasn't patronizing or surprised, simply an observation. "So do you," Emma replied, passing the canteen back to him. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that she quickly dismissed. Getting attached to an employer, any employer, was dangerous folly. They continued working through the afternoon, moving along the fence line methodically. Ethan was a patient teacher when she encountered tasks she hadn't done before, showing her techniques for stretching wire that put less strain on her smaller frame, but never suggesting she couldn't do the work. By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. Emma was bone-tired but satisfied with the day's work. After caring for the horses, another task Ethan didn't exempt her from. Despite her exhaustion, they returned to the house for the evening meal. "You cook as well?" Emma asked, surprised to find Ethan already preparing food. "Had to learn," he replied with a shrug. "Can't afford to hire a cook just for myself, but I'm no expert. If you've got skills in that area, I wouldn't turn down the help." "I can cook," Emma offered. "My mother taught me, and I've worked in kitchens before." It had been one of the safer jobs she'd held, though even kitchen work had its hazards when the wrong sort of man was in charge. "We can trade off then," Ethan suggested. "Or work together. Probably more efficient that way." That evening's meal was simple salt pork, beans and cornbread, but filling. As they ate, Ethan outlined the work for the next few days, moving cattle to the newly repaired pasture, checking the creek for any blockages that might affect the water supply, harvesting what was ready in the small vegetable garden. "I hope you don't mind the variety," he said. "Ranch work never really ends, just changes with the seasons and needs." "I don't mind," Emma assured him. "I prefer staying busy." Idle time meant time to think, to remember things she'd rather forget. After dinner, to Emma's surprise, Ethan pulled a worn book from the shelf. "I usually read a bit in the evenings," he explained, almost apologetically. "Feel free to choose something if you'd like." He gestured to the bookshelf. Emma approached the shelves with undisguised interest. Books had been her refuge since childhood, though opportunities to read had been scarce in recent years. The collection was modest, but varied: some practical guides to ranching and farming, some novels, even a few volumes of poetry. She selected a novel she hadn't read before and settled into a chair near the fireplace, which remained unlit in the summer heat. They read in companionable silence, the only sounds the occasional turning of pages and the night insects beginning their chorus outside. It was so peaceful, so unexpectedly normal, that Emma found herself repeatedly glancing up at Ethan, waiting for the moment when the facade would crack. But he remained absorbed in his book, showing no signs of the restlessness or sudden mood shifts that had warned her of danger with previous employers. When the clock on the mantel struck 9, Ethan closed his book and stood. "Early start again tomorrow," he said. "Good night, Emma." "Good night," she replied, watching as he retreated to his room on the opposite side of the house from hers. Alone in her room, door locked as before, Emma lay awake despite her physical exhaustion. One day of decent treatment didn't erase years of hard lessons. Men like Ethan Abernathy, quiet, seemingly respectful, were rare in her experience. And even the good ones had their breaking points, their moments of weakness or cruelty. She would remain vigilant, ready to flee at the first sign of trouble. But as sleep finally claimed her, Emma allowed herself to acknowledge that for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't afraid of what the morning might bring. The next week passed in a similar pattern of hard work and surprisingly comfortable evenings. Emma threw herself into the ranch tasks, determined to prove her worth. She helped move the cattle, learned to mend tack under Ethan's patient instruction, and took over much of the cooking, discovering that he genuinely appreciated her skills in the kitchen. As they worked together, Emma began to notice things about Ethan Abernathy beyond his unexpected decency. The way his serious expression would occasionally break into a genuine smile that transformed his features. How his hands, strong enough to break a post in two, could be surprisingly gentle when treating a calf's injured leg. The quiet concentration in his blue eyes when he was focused on a task. More surprisingly, she found herself slowly relaxing in his presence. Not completely. Emma doubted she would ever fully lower her guard around any man again, but enough that conversation began to flow more naturally between them. They discussed practical matters of the ranch, exchanged opinions on the books they read in the evenings, and occasionally shared carefully edited stories from their pasts. Emma learned that Ethan had lost his parents young as well, though to different circumstances, his father to a gunfight in a town saloon, his mother to grief and the harsh winter that followed. He'd been raised by a series of reluctant relatives until he was old enough to work, which explained both his self-sufficiency and his empathy for her situation. In turn, she told him about her parents' small farm in Virginia, the simple but happy childhood she'd had before the fever took them both within days of each other. She spoke of her love for growing things, how she'd maintained a small herb garden even during her transient years, because the connection to the earth grounded her when nothing else did. What she didn't tell him were the darker chapters: the married farmer in Kentucky who'd cornered her in the barn when his wife was away, the saloon owner in Missouri who'd offered her a job serving drinks but expected her to serve much more, the widower in Colorado who'd seemed kind until the whiskey came out. She kept those stories locked away, along with the physical and emotional scars they'd left. But even with those omissions, Emma found herself sharing more with Ethan than she had with anyone in years. There was something about his quiet attentiveness, the way he listened without judgment, that made it easier to speak of the past. On Sunday, true to his word, Ethan declared it a day of rest. "No ranch work today," he announced at breakfast, "though the animals still need tending." After the minimal necessary chores were complete, Emma found herself with free time, a novel concept after a week of dawn to dusk labor. She wandered to the small garden behind the house, assessing what vegetables were ready for harvest and which plants needed attention. She was kneeling among the bean plants, carefully weeding, when Ethan approached with 2 glasses of water. "Thought you could use this," he said, offering her one. "Though I'm not sure tending the garden counts as resting." Emma accepted the water gratefully. "This isn't work to me," she explained. "Growing things has always been more pleasure than labor." Ethan nodded, looking over the neat rows of vegetables. "It shows. The gardens never looked this good. Previous hands had no interest in it, saw it as woman's work, I suppose." "And you?" Emma asked, curious. "Do you see it that way?" "I see it as necessary work," Ethan replied practically. "Food doesn't care who grows it, just that it's grown well." He knelt beside her, pulling a weed she had missed. "My mother kept a garden much like this one. Taught me the difference between what should grow and what shouldn't." They worked side by side for a while, the silence comfortable between them. Emma was acutely aware of his presence, the careful way he moved to avoid crowding her, the respectful distance he maintained even as they worked the same soil. "There's a creek about half a mile east," Ethan said eventually. "Good spot for fishing if you're interested. Might make a nice change for supper." The idea of fresh fish was appealing, and Emma agreed readily. They gathered simple fishing gear and walked to the creek, which ran cool and clear through a small valley dotted with cottonwoods and willows. It was a peaceful spot, with birds calling from the trees and the gentle sound of water flowing over stones. They settled on the bank, baited their hooks, and cast their lines into the deeper pools where fish might be hiding from the midday sun. Emma hadn't fished since her childhood, but the skill returned quickly, the rhythmic cast and retrieve soothing in its simplicity. "You mentioned Virginia in your letter," Ethan said after they had been fishing in silence for some time. "What brought you all the way to Texas?" Emma tensed slightly. This was dangerous territory, too close to the stories she wasn't ready to share. "Necessity," she answered carefully. "Work was scarce back east after the war. I heard there were opportunities out west." Ethan nodded, seeming to accept her vague answer. "And was there opportunity?" "Some," Emma admitted, "though not always the kind I was hoping for." She focused on her line, avoiding his gaze. "I've noticed the way you lock your door at night," Ethan said quietly, his eyes on the water. "And how you watch the exits in any room, how you startle when I move too quickly." Emma's heart began to pound. This was at the moment when his observations would turn to accusations, when the kindness would be revealed as a temporary facade. But Ethan continued, his voice still gentle. "I'm not asking for your stories, Emma. They're yours to share or keep as you choose. I just want you to know that you're safe here. Whatever you're running from, it won't find you on my ranch." The simple declaration, offered without demand or expectation, nearly undid her. Emma blinked rapidly, fighting back unexpected tears. "Thank you," she managed after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. They fished in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, one filled not with caution and assessment, but with the beginning of something that felt dangerously like trust. By mid-afternoon, they had caught enough trout for a good meal and headed back to the ranch house. Emma cleaned and prepared the fish while Ethan gathered vegetables from the garden. They worked together on the meal, moving around the kitchen with an ease that surprised Emma. In just a week, they had developed a rhythm, anticipating each other's movements, passing utensils without needing to ask. The fish, fried with herbs from Emma's expanding garden and served with fresh vegetables, made for the best meal they'd had since her arrival. As they ate, Emma found herself smiling more freely than she had in years, caught up in Ethan's understated humor, as he recounted a story about a particularly stubborn bull he'd once encountered. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink, Emma allowed herself to acknowledge a troubling truth. She was beginning to care for Ethan Abernathy. Not just as an employer who treated her with unexpected decency, but as a man, one whose rare smiles made her heart beat faster, whose quiet strength made her feel secure for the first time in years. It was dangerous, this feeling. Caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability had cost her dearly in the past. But as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky and Ethan's deep voice named constellations she had never learned, Emma wondered if perhaps some risks were worth taking. July turned to August, and the Texas heat intensified. The work grew harder as they battled to keep the cattle watered and the crops from withering under the relentless sun. But Emma found herself thriving despite the challenges. Her body grew stronger, her skin tanned to a golden brown, and the haunted look that had shadowed her eyes for so long began to fade. Ethan noticed the change in her. "You look more at home here," he commented one evening as they shared the last of a peach cobbler Emma had made from fruit traded with a neighboring ranch. "I feel more at home," she admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. San Elizario was beginning to feel like a place she belonged, not just another temporary stop on an endless journey. As they worked side by side day after day, the boundaries between employer and employee began to blur. Ethan sought her opinion on ranch decisions, valuing her growing knowledge of the land and animals. Emma, in turn, found herself investing in the future of the ranch, suggesting improvements to the garden, more efficient ways to organize the storage shed, new recipes that would make their provisions last longer. They were partners in a way Emma had never experienced before, equals, despite their different strengths and backgrounds. Ethan's "welcome home" partner on that first day had seemed like meaningless words then. Now, they were beginning to feel true. But even as their working relationship deepened into friendship, Emma maintained certain barriers. She still locked her door at night, still kept her meager possessions packed and ready for a quick departure, still woke from nightmares that left her shaking and alert in the darkest hours. Ethan respected these boundaries without question, never pushing for more closeness than she offered, never appearing at her door unannounced, never making any move that might be construed as taking advantage of their isolated situation. His patience and restraint only made Emma's growing feelings for him more confusing and more powerful. The situation might have continued in this uncertain state indefinitely, if not for the events of a scorching afternoon in late August. Emma and Ethan had ridden out to check on cattle in the furthest pasture, worried about access to water during the prolonged dry spell. The animals seemed to be managing, clustering in the shade of scattered trees near the creek that still flowed, though lower than usual. "Should be okay for now," Ethan concluded after counting heads and checking the condition of several calves. "But we'll need rain soon, or we may have to consider moving them closer to the main water source." They were preparing to ride back when the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. Visitors were rare at the remote ranch, and unexpected ones rarer still. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to the revolver he wore on his hip, a precaution Emma had never seen him need to use. 3 riders appeared over the rise, moving at a steady pace toward them. As they drew closer, Emma felt the blood drain from her face. She recognized the man in the lead, his heavy build, his florid complexion, the way he sat a horse like he owned everything beneath it. Robert Harrison. Her former employer. The man she had fled in Virginia after he had cornered her in the kitchen, drunk and violent, his intentions unmistakable. "Stay behind me," Ethan murmured, noting her reaction though he couldn't know its cause. He moved his horse slightly forward, placing himself between Emma and the approaching riders. "Afternoon," Harrison called as they drew near, his voice carrying the same false joviality Emma remembered all too well. "Hope we're not intruding. Looking for a place called the Abernathy Ranch." "You found it," Ethan replied, his tone neutral but watchful. "I'm Ethan Abernathy. What brings you to my land?" Harrison's gaze slid past him to Emma, and the smile that spread across his face sent ice through her veins. "Well now, there she is. Thought I recognized that mare." He addressed Emma directly. "You've led me on quite a chase, Miss Gardner. Virginia to Texas is a long way to track down a thief." "Thief?" Ethan questioned, glancing back at Emma. "She stole money from me before she ran off," Harrison lied smoothly. "Quite a substantial sum. I've been following her trail for months." "That's not true," Emma found her voice, though it shook slightly. "I never took anything that wasn't mine." Harrison's expression hardened. "Are you calling me a liar, girl?" I have witnesses back in Virginia who will testify to your character or lack thereof." Ethan remained calm, his posture relaxed but alert. "Mr. Harrison, was it? You've come a long way on what seems to be a disputed claim. Perhaps we should continue this discussion at the house, where we can all sit down and speak civilly." It was a reasonable suggestion, exactly what Emma would expect from the fair-minded man she had come to know. But the thought of Harrison anywhere near the sanctuary of the ranch house made her physically ill. "Ethan, please," she began, moving her horse forward slightly. "He's not quiet, Emma," Harrison snapped, his affable mask slipping. "The men are talking." He returned his attention to Ethan. "I appreciate the hospitality, Mr. Abernathy, but this is a simple matter. The girl stole from me, and I've come to collect what's owed one way or another." The threat in his words was unmistakable, and Emma saw Ethan's shoulders tighten almost imperceptibly. "Miss Gardner works for me now," Ethan said, his voice taking on an edge Emma had never heard before. "And she's under my protection. Whatever dispute you have with her, we can resolve it legally through proper channels." Harrison laughed, a harsh sound that raised the hair on the back of Emma's neck. "Legal channels? Out here? Don't be naive, Abernathy. We're a long way from any law that matters." The two men flanking Harrison shifted in their saddles, hands moving casually toward their weapons. They were hired guns. Emma realized with growing horror, not ranch hands or friends, but men paid to do Harrison's violent bidding. "Last chance to handle this peacefully," Harrison said, all pretense of civility gone now. "Send the girl over here with my money and we'll be on our way. Refuse, and things might get uncomfortable for everyone." Emma looked desperately at Ethan, expecting to see doubt in his eyes, the natural calculation of a man deciding whether a woman he barely knew was worth dying for. Instead, she saw only calm resolve. "Emma stays where she is," Ethan stated flatly. "And you gentlemen are trespassing on my property. I'm asking you politely to leave." Harrison's face darkened with anger. "You're making a mistake, Abernathy, one you might not live to regret." "Perhaps," Ethan acknowledged. "But it wouldn't be the first time I've been told that." His hand remained steady near his gun, his posture alert but not aggressive. The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the hot afternoon air. Emma held her breath, painfully aware that her past had not only caught up with her, but now threatened Ethan as well. This good man who had shown her nothing but kindness might die because of her, because she had brought this danger to his doorstep. Harrison made the first move, a slight nod to the man on his right. The hired gun's hand flashed toward his weapon, but Ethan was faster, impossibly fast. His revolver cleared its holster in a blur of motion, and a single shot cracked across the pasture. The gunman cried out, clutching his shoulder as his weapon fell to the ground. Before the echo faded, Ethan had his gun trained on Harrison. "Next one won't be so merciful," he warned, his voice deadly calm. "Take your man and go, don't come back to my land." Harrison's face contorted with fury, but he wasn't fool enough to test Ethan further, not with one man already wounded, and the clear evidence that the quiet rancher was more dangerous than he appeared. "This isn't over," he spat, turning his horse. "The girl isn't worth dying for, Abernathy." "That's where you're wrong," Ethan replied, his gun remaining steady. "Now ride out before I forget my hospitality." Harrison and his remaining uninjured man helped the wounded gunslinger mount, then turned their horses and rode away, dust billowing behind them. Ethan kept his weapon trained on them until they disappeared over the ridge, then holstered it with a sigh. "Are you all right?" he asked, turning to Emma, concern etched on his features. The question undid her. After everything that had just happened, his first thought was for her well-being. Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes, tears she had held back for months, years, perhaps. "I didn't steal from him," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear to you, Ethan, I never stole from anyone." "I know," he replied simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Let's get back to the house. We need to prepare in case they return." They rode back in tense silence, Emma's mind racing through the implications of what had just occurred. Harrison had found her. After all this time, all the distance she had put between herself and Virginia, he had tracked her down. And now Ethan was involved, his life endangered because of her presence. The ranch house, which had begun to feel like home, suddenly seemed exposed and vulnerable. As they unsaddled the horses, Emma made her decision. She couldn't stay. Harrison would return, perhaps with more men next time, and Ethan would be outnumbered. She couldn't be responsible for that. "I should leave," she said quietly as they entered the house. "Tonight, while it's still light enough to travel a ways. He's after me, not you. If I'm gone, no." Ethan's response was immediate and firm. "Running won't solve this, Emma. Men like Harrison don't give up easily. And I won't send you back out there alone, especially not with him hunting you." "But he'll come back," Emma protested. "You saw him, heard what he said. He won't stop, and next time he'll bring more men. I can't let you risk your life for me." Ethan moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. "Emma, look at me." When she reluctantly met his gaze, he continued. "I meant what I said out there. You're under my protection now. We'll face this together." The conviction in his voice made her want to believe him, to trust that they could somehow overcome this threat. But fear, the constant companion of her adult years, whispered otherwise. "You don't even know what you're protecting me from," she said miserably. "What kind of man he really is, what he tried to do to me." "Then tell me," Ethan suggested gently, "if you want to, but know that it won't change my mind either way." Emma took a deep, shuddering breath. She had kept her darkest experiences locked away for so long, sharing them with no one. But if Ethan was willing to risk his life defending her, he deserved to know why. "I worked for Harrison in Virginia," she began haltingly, "as a housekeeper after his wife died. He seemed decent enough at first, but then he started drinking more, watching me when I worked." She wrapped her arms around herself, the memories pressing in. "One night he cornered me in the kitchen. He was drunk, violent, he said terrible things about what he wanted to do to me. I fought back, broke a plate over his head when he tried to force himself on me, and ran. I took nothing but what was already mine, I swear it." Ethan's expression had darkened as she spoke, a muscle twitching in his jaw, but his voice remained steady. "I believe you, Emma. And I understand now why you've been so cautious, why you lock your door at night." "He's not the first," Emma admitted, the words spilling out now that she had begun. "There were others before him, men who offered work but expected more. Each time I fled with less until I had almost nothing left when I reached Texas." She looked up at him, needing him to understand. "That's why I can't let you risk yourself for me. I'm not worth it, Ethan. I'm just damaged goods." The words hung in the air between them, Emma's deepest fear finally spoken aloud. She expected pity, perhaps, or a reassessment of her worth now that he knew the truth. Instead, Ethan's expression softened, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "What happened to you, what those men tried to take, it doesn't diminish your worth, Emma. Not to me." He hesitated, then slowly, giving her every opportunity to move away, reached out to take her hand. His touch was warm, gentle, a request rather than a demand. "You are brave and strong and good, and you deserve to be safe, to have a home where no one hurts you or makes you afraid." Emma looked down at their joined hands, her vision blurring with unshed tears. "I've felt safe here," she whispered. "With you, safer than I've felt in years." "Then stay," Ethan urged. Let me help you fight this battle. We're partners, remember?" The word echoed back to their first meeting, to the greeting that had so confused her then. "Welcome home, partner." Perhaps Emma thought he had meant it all along. "All right," she conceded finally. "But we need a plan. Harrison won't give up easily." Ethan nodded, reluctantly releasing her hand to move toward the window, checking the approach to the house. "We'll fortify what we can tonight. Tomorrow I'll ride to town, speak with the sheriff. Harrison may not respect the law, but having it on our side can't hurt." They spent the evening preparing for the possibility of an attack, checking ammunition, barricading vulnerable windows, discussing what to do if Harrison returned with more men. Throughout it all, Ethan remained calm and methodical, his presence a steady anchor against Emma's fear. That night, despite the threat hanging over them, Emma slept more soundly than she expected. Something had shifted between them, a deepening of trust that went beyond their previous careful friendship. She had shared her darkest secrets with Ethan, and rather than rejecting her, he had only drawn closer. Morning came without incident, and after a hurried breakfast, Ethan prepared to ride to San Elizario to speak with the sheriff. Before he left, he handed Emma his spare revolver. "You know how to use this?" he asked seriously. Emma nodded. Her father had taught her the basics of shooting when she was young, and though she wasn't expert, she could hit what she aimed at. "Good. Keep it with you. I'll be back before sundown." Ethan hesitated, then added, "If anything happens while I'm gone, if Harrison returns, don't try to face him. Hide or run. Your safety matters more than anything else." Emma took the gun, the weight of it unfamiliar but reassuring in her hand. "Be careful in town," she urged. "Harrison might have men watching." "I will." Ethan's gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than necessary, something unspoken in his eyes. Then he turned and mounted Thunder, riding out with a promise to return as quickly as possible. Alone at the ranch, Emma kept busy to ward off fear. She tended the animals, worked in the garden, and maintained a vigilant watch on the surrounding land. The revolver remained within reach at all times, a constant reminder of the danger that had followed her to this place. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Emma grew increasingly anxious. Ethan should have returned by now. San Elizario wasn't that far, and his business with the sheriff wouldn't have taken all day. Had Harrison's men intercepted him on the road? Was he injured or worse? She was about to saddle Penny and go looking for him when the sound of approaching horses reached her. Multiple horses, moving fast. Emma's heart raced as she grabbed the revolver and moved to a window, peering cautiously through the curtain. Relief flooded her when she recognized Ethan at the head of the group. But he wasn't alone. 4 other riders accompanied him, all wearing badges that caught the late afternoon sun. The sheriff and his deputies had returned with Ethan, a show of force that made Emma's knees weak with gratitude. She went to the door to meet them, the revolver still in her hand but no longer raised. "Emma," Ethan called as he dismounted, his expression a mix of relief and urgency. "Harrison's in town. He's been making accusations at the saloon, trying to gather men to come out here." The sheriff, a weathered man with gray in his beard and hard eyes that had seen too much frontier justice, stepped forward. "Miss Gardner, I'm Sheriff Thomas. Mr. Abernathy here has told me about your situation." Emma nodded warily, uncertain how much Ethan had shared and how the law would view her flight from Virginia. "I want you to know that you've got nothing to fear from the law in San Elizario," the sheriff continued. "We take a dim view of men who threaten women and an even dimmer view of outsiders bringing trouble to our county." "Thank you," Emma managed, overwhelmed by this unexpected alliance. "Harrison's been warned to leave town," the sheriff explained, "but men like him rarely listen to warnings." My deputies and I will stay tonight, just in case he decides to ignore mine." The presence of the lawman transformed the atmosphere at the ranch. Where before there had been only Emma and Ethan preparing to face an unknown number of adversaries, now there was a force of trained men positioning themselves strategically around the property. The sheriff set up a watch rotation, ensuring that all approaches to the house would be monitored throughout the night. As darkness fell, Emma found herself in the kitchen preparing a meal for the unexpected guests. Ethan joined her, moving with the easy familiarity they had developed over their weeks together. "You didn't have to tell them," Emma said quietly, referring to her history with Harrison. "About what he tried to do." "I told them only what they needed to know," Ethan assured her. "That Harrison had threatened you, that you had fled legitimate danger, not criminal charges. The specifics remain private." Emma nodded gratefully, continuing to slice bread. After a moment, she asked, "Do you think this will end it, having the sheriff involved?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "It might. Harrison's type usually prefers to avoid direct confrontation with the law, but I can't promise it will be over so easily." "I never expected any of this when I came here," Emma admitted. "I thought I'd work for a few months, save some money, and move on before." She trailed off. "Before what?" Ethan prompted gently. Emma met his gaze. "Before I cared too much, before leaving became difficult." The admission hung between them, weighted with implication. Ethan moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "And now? Do you still plan to leave when this is over?" The question struck at the heart of everything Emma had been feeling but afraid to acknowledge. Did she want to leave? The ranch had become more than a temporary haven. It had become home in a way no place had been since her parents died. And Ethan had become far more than an employer. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "For so long, running has been my only strategy. Stay nowhere long enough to form attachments, to be vulnerable. But here," she gestured vaguely, encompassing the kitchen, the ranch him. "Here I've started to wonder if there might be another way to live." "There is," Ethan said, his voice low and fervent. "Emma, when I said welcome home that first day, I meant it as common courtesy. But now," he took a deep breath, "now I want it to be true. I want this to be your home for as long as you choose." He was offering her a future, not demanding, not assuming, but offering. The possibilities unfurled before Emma like a map to unknown territory, both exciting and terrifying. Before she could respond, a shout from outside shattered the moment. One of the deputies called a warning, and the unmistakable sound of approaching riders followed. Harrison had come despite the sheriff's warning, and from the sound of it, he had brought reinforcements. Ethan's expression hardened as he reached for his gun. "Stay inside," he instructed Emma, "away from the windows." But Emma had spent too long running, too long hiding from men like Robert Harrison. With steady hands, she picked up the revolver Ethan had given her. "No," she said firmly, "we face this together. Partners, remember." Surprise flickered across Ethan's face, followed by something that might have been pride. He nodded once, then moved toward the door, Emma at his side. Outside, the scene was tense but controlled. The sheriff and his deputies had positioned themselves strategically around the yard, weapons ready but not yet drawn. Harrison and 6 men had ridden up to the edge of the property, halting when confronted by the lawman. "This is as far as you go, Harrison," the sheriff called. "I told you to leave town, not ride out looking for more trouble." Harrison sat tall in his saddle, his face partially shadowed by the falling darkness. "This is a private matter between me and the girl," he replied, voice carrying across the yard. "The law has no place in it." "The law has a place anywhere in my county," the sheriff countered, "especially when it involves threats against its citizens." "Citizen," Harrison scoffed. "She's nothing but a thieving runaway. Ask around Virginia if you don't believe me." Emma stepped forward, moving to stand beside the sheriff. Fear still coursed through her, but it was overshadowed by a growing anger at this man who had chased her across half the country, who had threatened the peace she had found, who had made her feel worthless for so long. "I stole nothing from you, Mr. Harrison," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Nothing that was yours to claim." "You ungrateful little," Harrison began, but the sheriff cut him off. "That's enough," he said sharply. "Harrison, you and your men turn around and ride out now while you still can. This is your final warning." For a tense moment, it seemed Harrison might order his men to attack despite being outnumbered by lawmen, but self-preservation won out over vengeful pride. With a final venomous glare at Emma, he wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over," he called back, the same threat he had made in the pasture. "You can't hide behind badges forever." "No," Emma agreed, finding a courage she hadn't known she possessed, "but I'm done hiding altogether. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Mr. Harrison, and I'm not running." Ethan moved to stand beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers, a united front against the man who had brought so much fear into her life. Together, they watched as Harrison and his hired guns rode away into the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading until silence returned to the ranch. "He'll be back," one of the deputies said grimly. "Maybe," the sheriff acknowledged, "but not tonight, I think. And by tomorrow, he'll have more to worry about than settling old scores." "What do you mean?" Emma asked. The sheriff's weathered face broke into a slight smile. "While we were waiting for Mr. Abernathy to fetch you from the ranch, I sent a telegram to the authorities in Virginia. Seems Mr. Harrison is wanted for questioning there regarding some financial irregularities at his bank. Nothing confirmed yet, but enough to make him think twice about drawing attention to himself." Relief washed over Emma, followed quickly by concern. "Will that be enough to stop him?" "Men like Harrison care about two things: money and reputation," the sheriff replied. "Threaten either, and they usually back down, but we'll keep watch tonight just to be sure." True to his word, the sheriff arranged for his deputies to maintain a patrol around the ranch through the night. Emma and Ethan provided food and coffee, the atmosphere in the house gradually relaxing as the immediate threat receded. Late that night, after the lawmen had settled into their watch positions, and the house was quiet, Emma found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cooling night air, looking out at the Texas stars that had begun to feel like her own. The creak of the door announced Ethan's presence before she saw him. He settled onto the porch step beside her, close but not touching, respecting the space she might need. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. Emma shook her head. "Too much happening in here," she tapped her temple lightly. "Hard to quiet my thoughts." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of the ranch washing over them, cicadas chirping, the occasional lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "We never finished our conversation," Ethan said eventually, "before Harrison arrived." Emma felt her pulse quicken. "No, we didn't. I meant what I said, Emma. I want this to be your home if you choose it, not just as my employee, but—" He hesitated, then continued with quiet determination. "But as my partner in every sense. I care for you. More than I thought possible after knowing someone for such a short time." The declaration, simple and heartfelt, brought tears to Emma's eyes, not from fear or sadness, but from a welling emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "I care for you too," she whispered. "So much that it terrifies me." Ethan turned to face her more fully, his expression visible in the moonlight. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because caring means risking," Emma explained. "It means being vulnerable, And every time I've been vulnerable before, I've been hurt. I would never hurt you, Emma. The quiet conviction in his voice made her believe him, against all her hard-learned caution. I know, she said, realizing as she spoke that it was true. That's what makes you different from any man I've known since my father. You've shown me nothing but respect, even when you had every opportunity to be otherwise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Ethan reached for her hand. His calloused palm was warm against hers, the touch both comforting and electrifying. I can't promise life will always be easy here, he said seriously. Ranching is hard work and Texas can be unforgiving, but I can promise you this. You will always be safe with me, you will always be respected, and you will always, always be enough, exactly as you are. The words broke something loose inside Emma. Some final barrier she had maintained even as she had begun to trust this man. Tears spilled down her cheeks unchecked, not the tears of fear or desperation she had grown accustomed to, but tears of release, of letting go of the past that had haunted her for so long. I don't want to leave, she admitted through her tears. I want to stay here with you. I want to see what we might build together. Ethan's face transformed with a smile so genuine, so full of hope, that Emma felt her heart expand in response. Tentatively, he raised his free hand to her cheek, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "May I kiss you, Emma?" he asked softly. The question itself was a gift, the choice, the agency he continued to offer her even in this moment. Emma nodded, unable to form words past the emotion in her throat. Ethan leaned forward slowly, giving her time to change her mind if she wished. But Emma had no desire to retreat, not from this man who had shown her what true partnership could be. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand, a promise rather than a claim. Emma had been kissed before, but never like this, never with such tenderness, such respect, such genuine emotion. She leaned into it, her hand finding Ethan's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him as their kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more honest, more real than anything she had experienced before. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Emma Gardner," he said simply. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you showed up at my door so brave despite your fear." "I love you too," Emma replied, the words feeling both foreign and absolutely right on her tongue. "I fought against it, tried not to. But you made it impossible not to love you, Ethan Abernathy." They remained on the porch until the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, talking softly of the future they might build together, of dreams long deferred now suddenly possible. Harrison and his threats seemed distant and diminished in the face of what they had found in each other, not just love, but a partnership of equals, a shared vision of a life worth fighting for. As the sun rose on a new day, Emma finally understood what Ethan had meant on that first day, when he had opened his door to a frightened stranger and said those words that had confused her so. "Welcome home, partner." It hadn't been just a greeting, it had been a prophecy. The next few days passed in a state of heightened vigilance tinged with new joy. The sheriff maintained a regular patrol past the ranch, but there was no further sign of Harrison or his men. A telegraph arrived from Virginia confirming that Harrison was indeed wanted for questioning regarding significant financial discrepancies at his bank, enough to warrant his arrest, should he show his face in San Elizario again. Emma dared to hope that perhaps the threat was truly gone, that Harrison had decided pursuing her wasn't worth the risk to his freedom. But neither she nor Ethan grew complacent. They remained alert, continued their precautions, and carried on with the work of the ranch. What changed was everything else between them. Where before there had been careful distance, now there were casual touches, shared smiles, stolen kisses between chores. Their evenings, once spent in companionable but separate activities, now found them sitting closer on the porch, hands intertwined as they watched the stars emerge. They spoke of the future cautiously at first, then with increasing certainty. Ethan talked of expanding the ranch, adding more cattle, perhaps even building a larger house someday. Emma shared her dreams of enhancing the garden, maybe starting a small orchard, using her mother's recipes to preserve fruits and vegetables for the winter months. "We could marry before winter," Ethan suggested one evening as they sat on the porch after a long day's work. "If that's not rushing things too much for you." Emma considered the question seriously. 6 weeks ago, the idea of marriage to any man would have filled her with dread, another form of captivity, another way to be controlled and diminished. But marriage to Ethan felt different, like an affirmation of the partnership they had already begun rather than a surrender of her independence. "It's not too soon," she decided, smiling as his face lit up with relief and joy. "But I want to be sure Harrison is truly gone from our lives before we take that step." Ethan nodded, understanding her caution. "We'll wait until we're certain then." "But not a day longer," he added with a grin that made her heart flutter. 2 weeks after Harrison's confrontation at the ranch, Sheriff Thomas rode out with news. Harrison and his men had been spotted crossing into Mexico, apparently deciding that putting a national border between himself and potential arrest was the wisest course of action. "Doesn't mean he won't ever come back," the sheriff warned, "but men like him usually find new targets once the old ones prove too troublesome. I'd say you're as safe now as anyone can be in this territory." The news lifted a weight from Emma's shoulders she hadn't fully acknowledged was there. That night, she didn't lock her bedroom door for the first time since arriving at the ranch, a small act of defiance against the fear that had ruled her life for so long. With the threat of Harrison receding, Emma and Ethan began to make concrete plans for their wedding. It would be a simple affair, held at the ranch with the few neighbors and friends Ethan had made during his years in Texas. Emma had no family to invite, but she found she didn't mind. She was building a new family now, one of her own choosing. October arrived with cooler temperatures and preparations for winter. Emma worked alongside Ethan to ensure the ranch would weather the coming months, preserving food from the garden, repairing buildings, preparing extra feed for the livestock. Each task performed together strengthened the bond between them, the easy rhythm of their partnership a constant source of quiet joy. The wedding took place on a clear, crisp November day, with the distant mountains visible against the blue sky. Sheriff Thomas officiated, having been ordained years earlier for just such occasions in the sparsely populated territory. The ranch hands from neighboring properties attended, along with the few townspeople Ethan had known long enough to call friends. Emma wore a new dress of deep blue, ordered specially from the Mercantile in San Elizario. She had no veil, no elaborate decorations, but she carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers gathered from the ranch that morning. As she walked from the house to where Ethan waited beneath a cottonwood tree, Emma felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in the deepest sense of the word. Ethan's face as he watched her approach was everything she could have hoped for: love, pride, and a kind of wonder that made her breath catch. He took her hand when she reached him, his touch steady and warm as it had been from the beginning. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the traditional vows taking on new meaning for Emma as she spoke them. To love, honor, and cherish, these weren't empty words but promises she made gladly, knowing they were equally returned. When Sheriff Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, and Ethan kissed her with tender reverence before their small gathering of witnesses, Emma felt a completion she had never expected to find. The celebration afterward was modest, but joyful, a feast prepared by Emma with help from the neighboring women. Music provided by one of the ranch hands who played the fiddle with surprising skill. Dancing in the yard as the autumn sun began its descent toward the horizon. As evening approached, the guests gradually departed, offering final congratulations and good wishes to the newly married couple. When the last wagon had disappeared down the long drive, Ethan turned to Emma with a smile that held both happiness and promise. "Mrs. Abernathy," he said, the name still new and wondrous on his tongue. "May I have the honor of escorting you home?" Emma laughed, gesturing to the ranch house just yards away. "It's not much of a journey." "The best journeys aren't measured in distance," Ethan replied, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. That night, Emma discovered the final truth of partnership with Ethan, that intimacy could be both passionate and tender, that desire could be expressed with respect, that her wishes and comfort mattered as much as his own. In his arms, she found not possession but belonging, not subjugation but equality, not fear but perfect trust. As winter settled over the Texas landscape, the Abernathy ranch prospered despite the challenges of the season. Emma and Ethan established new routines as husband and wife, their partnership deepening with each passing day. They weathered their first arguments, minor disagreements about ranch management or household decisions, and discovered that conflict, when approached with mutual respect, could strengthen rather than damage their bond. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pastures, seedlings in Emma's expanded garden, and the unexpected but joyful news that Emma was expecting their first child. "A baby," Ethan whispered in awe when she told him, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our child." "Are you happy?" Emma asked, though his radiant expression had already answered the question. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her, gathering her into a careful embrace. "You've given me everything, Emma, a true partnership, a home that feels like one, and now a family of our own." The pregnancy progressed through the Texas summer, with Ethan growing increasingly protective as Emma's condition became more apparent. He insisted on hiring additional help for the ranch, refusing to allow Emma to overexert herself, despite her protests that pregnancy didn't render her incapable. "I know you're strong," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, his hand resting on her growing belly. "But humor me in this, please. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you or our child." Emma relented, recognizing that his concern came from love rather than a desire to control. And truthfully, as the summer heat intensified, she was grateful for the assistance that allowed her to rest during the hottest parts of the day. On a stormy night in early November, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Emma went into labor. The midwife from San Elizario had been staying at the ranch for a week in anticipation of this moment, and took charge with calm efficiency, while Ethan paced anxiously in the main room of the house. The labor was long and difficult, but Emma faced it with the same courage she had shown throughout her life. As dawn broke over the ranch, her efforts were rewarded with the first cry of their son, a healthy, robust boy with Ethan's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair. When Ethan was finally allowed to enter the bedroom, his face wet with unashamed tears, Emma watched as he carefully took their son into his arms. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, sitting gently on the edge of the bed beside his exhausted wife. "Just like his mother. What shall we name him?" Emma asked, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny fingers. Ethan considered for a moment. "What about Thomas, after the sheriff who helped bring us together?" Emma smiled, liking the symmetry of it. Thomas Abernathy, it suits him. As she watched Ethan with their son, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frightened young woman expecting cruelty at every turn, to a wife and mother secure in the knowledge of her worth and her place in the world. The road had been long and often painful, but each step had led her here, to this family, this love, this home. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Abernathy ranch. The cattle business prospered under Ethan's careful management, allowing them to expand their holdings and improve the ranch house. Emma's garden became famous in the county for its abundance and variety, and her preserved goods won ribbons at the territorial fair. Thomas grew into a strong, kind-hearted boy with his father's steady nature and his mother's resilience. He was joined 2 years later by a sister, Sarah, whose arrival was considerably easier than her brother's had been, much to everyone's relief. There were difficult times, of course, seasons of drought that threatened the cattle, a particularly harsh winter that claimed several animals despite their best efforts. The year Ethan broke his leg falling from a horse, and Emma had to manage much of the ranch work while caring for 2 small children. But through it all, the foundation of their partnership held firm. They faced each challenge together, neither dominating nor yielding but working as the true equals Ethan had declared them to be on that very first day. Robert Harrison never returned to San Elizario. They learned through Sheriff Thomas that he had eventually been arrested in Mexico for swindling investors there, his past finally catching up with him in a foreign jail. The news brought Emma a final sense of closure, the last shadow of her past life dispelled by the brightness of the one she had built with Ethan. On the 10th anniversary of Emma's arrival at the ranch, Ethan surprised her with a gift, a new sign for the entrance to their property. Where once it had simply read Abernathy Ranch, it now proclaimed Abernathy and Gardner Ranch in bold, carved letters. "Because it has always been our partnership that made this place thrive," he explained as she traced the letters with her fingers. "And I want everyone who comes here to know it." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Thomas, now a lanky 10-year-old, teaching his 8-year-old sister to lasso a practice post, Emma leaned against Ethan's shoulder with a contented sigh. "You ever think about that first day?" she asked. "When I arrived here expecting the worst," Ethan's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Often. I remember how afraid you looked, how ready to run at the first sign of danger." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I remember thinking that whoever had put that fear in your eyes deserved to be horsewhipped." Emma smiled at his protective instinct, still strong after all these years. "I was so confused when you said 'welcome home, partner.' I thought it was some kind of trick." "And now?" Ethan asked, turning slightly to see her face. Emma looked out at their ranch, their home, their children, at the life they had built together from nothing but trust and hard work and love. "Now I know it was the most honest greeting anyone has ever given me," she said softly. "Because that's exactly what you offered, a home and a true partnership." "And that's what we've built," Ethan agreed, his voice warm with pride and love. "Together as equals." As the Texas sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Emma Gardner Abernathy sat beside the man who had taught her to trust again, watching their children play on land that belonged to them both, secure in the knowledge that she had found what she had never dared to hope for, not just safety or survival, but joy, purpose, and a love that had healed rather than harmed. She had arrived expecting cruelty like before, but Ethan Abernathy had opened his door and his heart, offering partnership instead of dominance, respect instead of fear, love instead of pain. And in accepting that offer, Emma had found not just a home, but her true self strong, capable, and worthy of the life she now led. In the wild expanse of Texas, where the sky seemed endless and the future stretched out before them like an open road, Emma and Ethan continued to write their story partners in every sense of the word, building a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone.